welcome to our fourth bonus episode. This is all about George Lazenby.
Yep, so George Lazenby, the man entrusted to replace Sean Connery as Bond. The first Bond actor since Connery to say the iconic line, Bond, James Bond. Now we're going to do a special episode on each of the actors that play Bond in the film franchise. So let's get into this one about George Lazenby.
Thanks, Andy. So as we did with Sean Connery, our first little segment is just a bit of a bio regarding the James Bond actors. So with George Lazenby, his name at birth was George Robert Lazenby. He was born on the 5th of September 1939 and his star sign is Virgo. So interestingly, Andy, both Bond actors so far have been a Virgo. So I don't believe in star signs or anything like that, but I thought that was an interesting tidbit. He was also born in New South Wales in Australia.
He had 5 children. Sadly, one of his children died from a brain tumour. Just the one sibling, a sister named Barbara, and he's been married twice. Firstly to Christina Gannett from 1971 to 1995, and then to Pam Shriver from 2002 to 2011. Pam Shriver herself was a former professional tennis player and won 133 titles during her career. That's not a typo, is it, Jay? That sounds incredible.
That is incredible. And have you heard of Pam Shriver? Because I've not watched much tennis, but growing up with Wimbledon being on TV, she is someone that I've heard during like the commentary, but I couldn't visualize her. But as part of this research, I googled her and looked at some images, so I know what she looks like now. But I didn't realise this until the research that he was married to a famous tennis player.
I didn't either. The name's familiar. I wouldn't have necessarily put that she was such a successful tennis player, but just a vague back of the mind recollection of the name is as much knowledge as I have.
So, like we've done with the Sean Connery episode, like Andy said, we're doing this for each of the actors that have played Bond. So we've covered the bio and a bit of a personal life, and what we're doing now is looking at what did George Lazenby do before James Bond, and then a bit about the James Bond role, and then what he did afterwards, and then we kind of summarise his films as well. So I'm going to kick us off with what did George Lazenby do before James Bond. So Lazenby spent a short time in the Australian Army before working as a car salesman and mechanic. He moved to London, England, hoping to build a career as a model, and he was actually spotted by a talent scout, freelance photographer, and within a year became one of the highest paid models in Europe. And you could often find Lazenby on billboards across the UK and Europe, so obviously moving to London did help his career as a model then.
Certainly did, and he also appeared in some TV adverts and was the face of Fry's chocolate bars. And in 1966, he was voted Top Model of the Year.
I say that wasn't the only big thing that happened in 1966, was it, Andy?
It was not. Ask any Englishman, they'll tell you all about it. But we represent multinational conglomerate here at the Rating Room, so we're not gonna spend too much time talking about that famous World Cup victory. We will talk about, though, that what that led to was Lazenby becoming James Bond. Now, how that happened, Cubby Broccoli met Lazenby for the first time while they were getting a haircut at the same barbershop. Now, Lazenby actually dressed like James Bond for his screen test, including a Rolex watch and a Savile Row suit that was ordered by Connery but not collected.
He was offered an audition, and at the audition, Lazenby accidentally punched the stunt coordinator in the face. Broccoli was impressed with his ability to display aggression. As we discussed previously in our On Her Majesty's Secret Service episode, Lazenby only portrayed James Bond in one Bond movie, the aforementioned On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah, he actually intended to make the next Bond film, which at the time was going to be The Man with the Golden Gun. However, by November 1969, and this was just prior to the release of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Lazenby said he no longer wished to play the role of Bond. And he'd actually been offered a contract for 7 movies. His agent actually had a hand in him not taking on the part because he convinced him that the secret agent gimmick would be archaic in the 70s. I mean, how wrong can you be?
I know. I wonder if he kept his agent after this, leaving the James Bond franchise, Andy. I wonder if he's going to keep his agent, because obviously, as you know, Connery came back, and then we had Roger Moore. I wonder at what point Lazenby started to think, maybe I shouldn't have listened to my agent about the Bond franchise.
You've got to think there's many points he could have. So was it when Connery came back and had God knows what as a pay rise, or was it when Moore got paid even more and you see the budget going up and up and up? What they really needed back then was the stats that you provide here on the rating room. Because you look at the budget going up and up and up, you look at the box office returns, maybe once you get to the end of the 90s, 30 years later, and Pierce Brosnan has grossed over $1 billion, that's probably when he's thinking, I wish I'd have not made that decision 30 years ago, but history as it was meant that he made that decision and he missed out.
Yeah, Andy, I'm just going to go off script now. So I'm just opening up our little tracker and I'm just going to see what 7 movies, if we assume that, I know The Man with the Golden Gun was going to be next. So obviously there was Diamonds Are Forever and Live and Let Die. So we take those 2 as well. The 7 films, Andy, would then include The Spy Who Loved Me, your favourite Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, and then if you include the 7th being On Her Majesty's Secret Service, that would have been all 7 movies. So that meant Roger Moore, obviously he wouldn't have just done 2, he would have only had Octopussy and A View to a Kill.
I mean, let's speculate even further. Let's say Lazenby does 7. Let's say Lazenby does between 1 and 7. Maybe he does 4. Maybe he does 5, for example. Does Roger Moore even get the gig after Lazenby's finished?
I don't think it would, just because of his age. Where we've said in our main podcast, when listeners get to the Roger Moore films, we've discussed his age on a number of episodes. So I think, obviously I don't have a crystal ball, Andy, and I can't go back in time. The fact that they liked Timothy Dalton earlier on, but they said that he was too young. You could imagine George Lazenby, if he did 7 or if he did 5, you could imagine Timothy Dalton coming on board and then picking up those other Roger Moore films and then just doing The Living Daylights and License to Kill as well. So we might never have been treated to the Roger Moore era if that happened.
I mean, the whole franchise could have been very, very different. If you're going from Connery to Lazenby to Dalton, does the franchise even exist? Does it survive? Is it as successful as it was in reality? All questions that we'll never know the answer to, but it's fun to play in this kind of fantasy world where Roger Moore never gets the chance to take on the Bond mantle. The direction becomes very, very different. I mean, we're going to talk about Moore and Dalton in future bonus episodes in more detail, but I think it's not a surprise to say that their portrayals were very different to Connery and Lazenby. So do the public accept the Bond franchise, or does it actually die out in the 70s, become archaic because of Lazenby and Dalton themselves? I guess we'll never know.
No. It's interesting because obviously Roger Moore was very much, like we said before, he's very much the smooth lover Bond. So we would never been treated to Roger Moore's era. But it's hard because we both said, haven't we, for the listeners that have listened to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, we've both said, Lazenby did fairly well. It's a good film as well, and we both kind of wondered what would have happened if he kind of carried on. And I think I even said it would have been nice to see him stay on for a few films. But yeah, it's interesting to see, where you're saying 7 movies, that would have just changed the whole landscape of Bond. And you don't know, would it be better? Would it have been worse? You can't say, can you? Because there's obviously people out there that love Roger Moore as James Bond.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, people will have their favourite Bonds, and I'm sure for some it would be Lazenby. And you're right in terms of what we've said on the main pod. He maybe needed more time to really establish himself. And if we go back to Connery, I think it may have been me that made this point, it may have been you, but I think we said the third film really set him apart, and that was Goldfinger. So when Connery came in, did Dr. No, then From Russia with Love, and then Goldfinger just blew it out of the water. Imagine Lazenby, you know, with the great start that he had with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, what his second and third film may have looked like. He could have stolen the mantle as quintessential Bond.
So yeah, so that's interesting, Andy. And so also interesting, Andy, is some quotes from Lazenby's co-stars during this time. So I'm going to pick up Diana Rigg, who obviously played Tracy Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And she said, "I can no longer cater for his obsession with himself. He is utterly unbelievable. Bloody impossible."
Yeah, that's quite a scathing remark from Diana. Desmond Llewellyn, who obviously played Q, didn't have much better to say. He was quoted as saying, "I draw a veil over the chap. How can you expect someone who's never acted before to take on a leading role?" And, you know, maybe he's got a point. At the time, so On Her Majesty's Secret Service was released 1969. So at that time, his performance received mixed reviews. There were some reviews that stated he delivered his lines poorly, but others stated that he was physically convincing in the role.
Yeah, and we discussed that, didn't we, Andy, as well, in terms of our main... When we discussed On Her Majesty's Secret Service in our main season 1, we definitely said the fight scenes were more realistic, because we were saying, you know, during the Sean Connery films beforehand, it was quite noticeable with the stuntmen. But with George Lazenby, you could tell he did a lot of his own stunts. And I always remember in On Her Majesty's Secret Service the bit where they go to Blofeld's base, and he kind of jumps from the helicopter and slides down, you know, on his, I think it's on his chest with the machine gun. He's just like a kid playing army.
Yeah, I remember that scene quite well. And you're right about the fight scenes and the stuntmen, or lack thereof, seemingly lack thereof. I think there was an element of realism to Lazenby.
Yeah, and Roger Moore also stated in 2007 that On Her Majesty's Secret Service was very well made. Peter Hunter, excellent fight stuff, excellent snow effects. But I think the end result for George was that it was one of the better Bonds. And we're obviously going to recap now, actually, what our ranking was for the Lazenby film. So in this section, we talk about each of the Bond films that the Bond actor has been in. Obviously, as we've mentioned, George Lazenby has only been in the one. So just to recap, I rated On Her Majesty's Secret Service at 8 out of 10. So a very strong 8 out of 10. And you have to listen to the main season 1 episode to see where all the rankings are for the 25 Bond films. So we're just focusing on the individual actors here. So Andy, do you want to just recap what you've ranked Lazenby's Bond?
Yeah, I gave this a very respectable 7 out of 10. So we both think very highly of this. Some of his other notable works, he actually played James Bond several times over the years in numerous parodies and unofficial 007 roles, notably the 1983 TV film The Return of the Man from U.N.C.L.E., in which his character is identified only by the initials JB, and also in an episode of The New Alfred Hitchcock Presents, entitled Diamonds Aren't Forever. Lazenby's quoted as saying, "After the Bond fiasco, nobody would touch me. Harry Saltzman had always said, if you don't do another Bond, you'll wind up doing spaghetti westerns in Italy. But I couldn't even get one of those. My agent couldn't believe it. But the word was out. I was difficult."
I do love a spaghetti western, Andy. And I can't remember if I've seen the TV film, the Return of the Man from U.N.C.L.E., but I've seen Man from U.N.C.L.E. as a kid, TV shows, with my parents having it on. But I don't recall watching the TV film. Oh, well, I was only 2 years old when it came out. And were you even born then, Andy? I don't think you were you? 83?
No, I'm an 84 baby myself.
So, Lazenby spent 15 months sailing around the world with Chrissy Towson, which ended when she became pregnant. And Lazenby has appeared in a range of films. He's not appeared in lots of films compared to some of the other Bond actors, but one of the other films he was in included Universal Soldier, so that's not to be... So this is a 1971 version and not the 90s, noughties kind of franchise that there is at the moment with Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren, who's obviously appeared in one of the James Bond films as well. He also appeared in an Italian film, Who Saw Her Die, Stoner, The Man from Hong Kong, and A Queen's Ransom.
And here's a little fun fact. Lazenby was due to make a film with Bruce Lee, and was actually due to meet Bruce Lee for lunch on the day that Bruce Lee died. What could have been?
And that would have been quite an interesting film, you know, because he could do martial arts as well, so it would look really authentic.
Yeah, I can imagine those being quite good. And also, just think of it from a marketing perspective. You've got Bruce Lee versus James Bond. That's kind of, you know, King Kong versus Godzilla, or Alien versus Predator.
Yeah, definitely. You definitely want to watch that, wouldn't you?
You absolutely would. Now, this section, which we did on the Sean Connery bonus episode, for those of you who tuned into that, we would go through the rating room favourites. So normally we'd go through 5 films that we both enjoy outside of the James Bond franchise. However, as you've heard, you know, the choice is very limited in terms of what Lazenby has done. And if we're being fully transparent, neither of us have actually seen anything Lazenby's been in other than the James Bond film that he called. So we're going to skip over this section, but trust me, it would have been really entertaining had we recorded it.
And the next segment we're doing is Rotten Tomatoes and IMDB. So I'm going to kick us off and look at the top 5 Lazenby films on Rotten Tomatoes, but we are excluding documentaries as well, and we're excluding films that has no tomato rating as well. So there's some films on there that has a 0, or they're not even a 0%. There's some films that don't even have a rating on there. So I'm going to kick us off and talk about, we'll just list the top 5 films in order. So the one with the highest rating is 100% Rotten Tomatoes rating, and that is The Man from Hong Kong, that was released in 1976, and that has an audience score of 61%. The Kentucky Fried Movie was released in 1977, and that had a tomato rating of 82% with an audience score of 66%. And then you've got your Bond movie, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, so that was released in 1969, has a fresh rating of 81% and an audience score of 64%. So that's a sneak peek into our end of season special, actually, because we're going to do an IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes ratings for the James Bond film. 4th place is Gettysburg, which was released in 1993, and it has a fresh rating of 77% and an audience score of 89%. And the 5th highest rated movie was Saint Jack, which was released in 1979 and has a fresh rating of 72% and an audience score of 76%. So reasonable high scores there for the 5 films, and as you can see, a lot of them are, well, around the 70s and late 60s. There's only one film there in 1993 that is in the top 5 for Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. So IMDb went a slightly different route. So their top 5, starting at number 1, it was Gettysburg from 1993, which they gave a 7.6 rating. The 2015 film Hunter was next with a 7.5. That's followed by Gut Feeling in 3rd place, which was made in 1999 and got a rating of 7.4. The Evil Inside Me from 1993 gave a rating of 7.3. And rounding out the top 5 is Saint Jack from 1979, which got a rating of 7.0. So IMDb very much on the more modern end of the spectrum, with 4 of the 5 being 90s onwards.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Andy. And, you know, we've both, well, you said earlier that we've not seen any other films by Lazenby. based purely on either score, Andy, or the name of the movie? Is there any out of those 5 in Rotten Tomatoes or 5 in IMDb that you think, I'm going to watch that?
One of those films appears in both lists, and that's Gettysburg. And I think what's interesting about that is if you look at the IMDb rating had it at the top, but Rotten Tomatoes had a fresh rating that put it in 4th place, but the audience rating for that was 89%, which was far higher than anything else in that top 5. So that suggests that it's got quite the following. And the name of the film, Gettysburg, suggests something historical that may have happened around that time. Maybe the Gettysburg Address, maybe it's linked to that, I don't know. But I am going to do some Googling after we've finished recording just to see what it's all about, and we'll see whether it is actually worth watching.
So Andy, I did a little bit of Googling about this film because it caught my eye, but then I saw how long the film is and I thought, I probably won't. So it has quite a strong cast. It's about the Battle of Gettysburg in the American Civil War, and the film lasts for 4 hours and 14 minutes. So if you've got, a spare evening, Andy, if your wife or, anyone else that might live in your house is wanting the TV or wanting to spend some time with you, Andy, that's going to be difficult to watch, I think.
I'm going to put this out there now. Any filmmakers, directors, producers, writers out there, please heed my words. No film needs to be 4 hours, 40 minutes long. No film ever needs to be that long. So maybe I'll give it a miss, or watch it as a series and break it down into 30-minute bite-sized chunks or something.
Yeah, it's a very long film. It's one of Wikipedia says it's one of the longest films ever. So yeah, that was interesting that you picked the one that I was thinking about. I'm intrigued about the Kentucky Fried Movie though. I'm intrigued about that name as well. And The Man from Hong Kong has a 100% rating, but I wonder, is that based because there's only been one review on there, so that's 100%. But yeah, I would like to. I don't want to set homework, Andy, but I am intrigued about watching at least one film by Lazenby just to see what he's like.
I feel like we owe him that at least, just to to do full justice to his tenure and as Bond. Then otherwise he is just one and done, and he's a ship passing in the night, isn't he?
Indeed. I know what we do is we discuss this off air, and then we can let our listeners know if we decide to watch a film, and we can always do an update, can't we, on any of our social media and let people know. Or any listeners out there, if you can recommend a film that isn't over 4 hours long that we can watch, that is a George Lazenby film, please let us know.
Indeed, we'd love your feedback. Let's move on and talk about awards and honours. So in this we're going to discuss any awards or nominations or honours that Lazenby received, as we will for all the Bond actors. He actually only received one nomination during his career, and that was a Golden Globe nomination for his role in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Most Promising Newcomer. However, he lost out to John Voight for his role in the Midnight Cowboy film. And also Michael Douglas was a nominee in this category in 1970 as well. So he was up against some quite strong competition there.
Yeah, and obviously Michael Douglas has had a very successful career, and so has John Voight. Imagine that, though, being nominated for Most Promising Newcomer and then not really having a very... Well, he's obviously had a career, but he's not had as a big career as, say, Douglas or Voight at all.
No, but what a way to start if from your first film you got that award next to your name. That's his career made at that point, surely.
I'm liking this too, Andy, some of the Bond films that we've watched where your favourite scene has been the opening credits. So it's potentially up there, and then maybe a downward trend.
And that very well may be the story of his career overall. I mean, we've talked about other films that have got higher ratings on other sites, but his career is quite short, and we talked about what some of his co-stars thought, that it was difficult and full of himself and all the rest of it. So He is very much that star that shone bright early on and but quickly faded away. At least that's what it appears on the surface.
So, you know, as we said before, we're planning to record a bonus episode for each of the actors that have played James Bond. So obviously this is our second one that we've done, which is George Lazenby. So make sure you listen to the Sean Connery episode that we've already released. And it's going to be interesting actually to see what the actors have achieved outside of the Bond franchise as well. So some of them have had distinguished careers and really successful careers. So thinking about our first focus on Sean Connery, we had a lot to discuss there. There were lots of films where we discussed, you know, the 5 different movies that we both like and looked at Rotten Tomatoes, IMDB. So Sean Connery has had a lot, and where we could discuss that in our bonus episode. George Lazenby, not so much. It'll be interesting to see, you know, with the other actors like, you know, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig. So it'll be interesting to see how these bonus episodes where we focus on the James Bond actor kind of turn out as well.
Absolutely, and as always, we'd love to hear from any of the listeners out there. You contact us via the usual social media accounts or website. Let us know what your favourite George Lazenby movies are. You know, is Bond the absolute peak of his career, or was that just the beginning? Is he underrated? Is he someone who should get a lot more respect than he does? Certainly look forward to hearing people's views on that. But that was a kind of a whistle-stop tour into the life and times of George Lazenby. So listen out for future bonus episodes where next up we're going to be talking about Roger Moore. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Well, that's this week's episode done. We hope you enjoyed it.
Special thanks to the band Sugar Tongue for the theme tune to The Rating Room. You can find them on all the usual social media channels, and be sure to check out their song The System, available now on Spotify.
You can find and message us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok and Instagram by searching The Rating Room.
You'll find all our social media links on our website, theratingroom.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Or feel free to drop us an email at theratingroom@gmail.com. Goodbye, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, right here on The Rating Room.